Other things are affecting us in our modern society, such as a shifting population demographic. Traditionally, the United States has been overwhelmingly majority Anglo-white population. Even many of the immigrants who had come to the United States in the 1850s or so were from Germany and Ireland. And then, of course, in the early 1900s, they were coming from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Italians, Poles, Hungarians, Russians even. They were still European folks. So, you have a predominantly white country that has slowly eroded as the decades continue to pass. As of today, America is roughly about 70% white, but it's continuing to change and will continue to change from this point forward for several different reasons. Before we get into the exact big reason, though, America's birth rate has changed for several different reasons. See, we talked several chapters ago about the baby boomer generation. Those are the folks born in the 10 to 20 years after the end of World War II. So the United States saw a massive spike in birth rates and population as a result of the baby boom. The baby boomers are coming of age now, and as they're coming of age, the massive group that is known as the baby boomers puts a very large strain on Social Security, Medicare, other different government resources, and it's continued to do so. All while the United States, while we're growing in population, we're actually decreasing in birth rates for several different reasons. One, we have better access to birth control products to regulate menstrual cycles or anything else along those lines. More awareness for other forms of contraception, and then, of course, abortion, which we'll talk about later on. Otherwise, though, people aren't having as many kids. So the average American family has just over 2 kids, where you look at a couple centuries ago, it was almost 10 kids. Okay? Benjamin Franklin is the second youngest of 17 children. 17 children. God. Wow. Okay. Thoughts and prayers to that mom. Otherwise, though, people are having fewer kids. And because of it, our birth rates have declined and our population demographic has shifted. In the 1960s, as I mentioned a couple chapters ago, the immigration movement that now lifted the restriction on the number of people coming from certain countries now meant that you could have an influx of people from Latin America and Asia that could come into our country on a legal basis. So the overwhelming majority of immigrants that come to the United States today come from places like Mexico, China, and other places throughout Asia and Latin America. Obviously, they're not white folks. So you also have immigrants from various different parts of West Africa. You still have European immigration, South Asia, so lots of Indian folks coming as well. The United States has changed. And it's changed so much that because we now have immigration from outside of predominantly white countries, it's changing the fabric of the overall demographic population. And that's going to continue to change. We've had rapid growth in immigration, and many debates have surfaced in the last decades, and especially in recent times, about what do you do with illegal immigration, undocumented workers, or anything else of the sort. As I mentioned in the last chapter, the Berlin Wall was built to keep people from leaving. Perhaps a wall would keep people who don't have a legal right to be here from coming out, or from getting in, rather. That being said, there has to be something that our government can do to streamline the process to make things more fair for people who want to improve their lot in life. The United States is a country of immigrants. We are an immigrant nation. And as somebody who has an immigrant background myself, I understand the immigrant mindset. My ancestors on both sides of my family came here with different opportunities that really have different parameters today. Okay? So, my mother's family, who immigrated from Mexico 100 years ago, was a different time than it is today. Various different head taxes could be paid back then. You could come through various different ports of entry, pay your tax, and come into the United States legally, and then eventually apply for residency and eventually citizenship. It works quite a bit drastically different now. So, some things have to give and be streamlined if we're going to continue growing population and growing our tax base and growing our economy, all the while balancing out fairness for people who want to be treated like human beings because they're not getting that in their home country. So something's going to have to change from that demographic. And I think things like the DREAM Act, DACA, anything else of the sort, those are good starts, and that's going to be continuously debated from this point forward. Another segment of our population that has struggled for centuries is the African American population. We talked a few chapters ago about the major civil rights movement that ended Jim Crow era laws and truly gave civil rights to black people. There have been a number of great strides that black people have made since slavery ended, and yet there still is a ways to go with black relations. And the black population continues to struggle with upward mobility. And you have a number of social justice warriors who bring various different plights to light. I may not always agree with their tactics, but I do appreciate their messages. So you have various different movements like the Black Lives Matter movement that's raising awareness about police brutality unto those in the black community. What is it like to drive while black? I will never know that struggle. I don't know what it's like. But I do have a heart for people who feel some sort of struggle. So I may not know exactly what it's like, but the Black Lives Matter movement has at least raised an awareness of what wrongs are still out there and how we can improve them. That's their point. So I don't agree with them when they block up I-35 or anything else of the sort in downtown Dallas, but I do agree with recognizing and acknowledging their plight. Improving relations with black people, improving those who are impoverished. What can we do to improve the lives of those who are impoverished, and how can we help them ascend? What barriers exist, and what can we do to remove those barriers? Those are very valid questions, and they're very, very valid for discussion. That is what is truly right and truly equal. If we are to truly see black people have an equal status in our country, we have got to stop arbitrarily arresting them. We've got to stop arbitrarily murdering them. And then black leaders also themselves need to have discussions within how they could improve their own plight and their situations too. How can they contribute to their overall success? I think it's a balanced approach. But the idea of there at least being discussion about how police relations can improve with the black society, how black people can be uplifted from a truly equality type standpoint. Those are all very worthy discussions, and it's about time that things would actually happen within that, but at least there's some movement. And I think having a black president was a step in a direction that perhaps could help that. We talked in the last chapter about Roe versus Wade, which was passed in 1973, Supreme Court movement that basically enabled women to get abortions. And the abortion debate is one of the hottest topics in America to this day. You have your pro-choice folks who deem my body, my life, the government should stay out of my body, they don't have a right. You have pro-life folks who are like, it's not just your body, there's a body inside of you that you're denying a right. And it's inhumane to tear this baby apart just because you didn't want it. But if it was a course of rape or incest or undue harm to the mother, then what about this? How's that inhumane? There are various different folks who have opposing viewpoints, whether religiously or morally or otherwise. The pro life, pro choice debate, I don't see going away anytime soon. Unless there's an absolute repeal of Roe versus Wade, I don't know if there's going to be any change. And I don't know if there would be enough support to repeal Roe versus Wade. So there are arguments to be made on both sides. Both sides are staunchly vehement in them being correct in their viewpoints, and you're not gonna see any give one way or the other. Um, so the abortion debate will continue to linger on. You're going to have various different restrictions, maybe, that might limit the amount of third-term abortions, late-term abortions, after-birth abortions, or anything else of the sort. Um, there are movements to ban federal funds from going to organizations like Planned Parenthood, which perform abortions. Um, Abortions in the coronavirus era are deemed as not being elective. That's one thing that kind of confuses me. Whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, an abortion is elective. That's what choice means. Unless it can cause undue harm to the mother, that's an elective choice. So I don't know. There are folks raising an eyebrow about how about how abortions are essential and others aren't. I don't know. That's a good question for another time. Otherwise, though, in the 1980s, speaking of virus, in the 1980s, a virus took the world by storm as it was sexually transmitted or otherwise transmitted through blood infusion. And that is HIV. AIDS. HIV eventually becoming AIDS. An autoimmunitory disease that attacks the immune system, thereby making somebody susceptible to disease. And the disease would ultimately kill because your body has essentially killed its own immune system. That's how AIDS works. So, various different epidemics have caught the world by storm since the 1980s. A number of folks have died because of AIDS. Um, Many different folks who know Freddie Mercury, the former lead singer of Queen, being one of them. Magic Johnson had contracted HIV in the early 1990s, and he's still alive and he's thriving. There have been medical advancements that have been made to where people with HIV or AIDS can live with the disease. As long as they have those medications, they'll be able to live and be able to control the virus and restore their immune systems. So it's possible, but it's likely you got to have a lot of money to do it. Magic Johnson has that money. Okay? So the idea of living with the disease is out there. Whether or not various different conspiracies exist that say there's actually a cure for AIDS, they just don't want it because there's no money in a cure, I don't know if I believe that. But otherwise, that's also up for debate. Okay? Much has been made in the last few decades about LGBTQ plus rights, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, and rights for gay people. I remember in the 1990s, it was a very big deal that Ellen DeGeneres, on her sitcom from the 1990s, came out of the closet and announced in her sitcom that she was in love with another woman. And it was this kind of big deal at the time. That was like 1997 or so. It was this really big deal at the time. And she said that that episode of her sitcom was actually meant to be like her truthful, real coming out. And she announced publicly that she was, in fact, a lesbian. And it was this big deal at the time. Oh my gosh, she's gay, she's a lesbian. And it kind of opened up the door for others to do the same thing. 20 some odd years ago, it was still kind of a big deal for somebody to come out of the closet. Nowadays, people come out of the closet and people recognize, okay, hey, if you're true to yourself, you're going to be happiest. And if you are happy, you're going to make everything else better. So being true to yourself matters more than something that any of the rest of us who are not gay don't understand. Be true to yourself, be happy, live your life. And that's something that we have taken away in recent years to have helped change perceptions and other mindsets in relation to gay people. Um, there have been a number of movements to quote unquote pray the gay away or other gay conversion therapies or anything else of the sort. I think they're highly counterproductive and they're I think they're detrimental to public health. But that's a whole different story. Otherwise, though, just over the years, I've just come to recognize that gay people are just people like any of the rest of us, and they deserve a right to be happy and free just like any of the rest of us. They deserve to have dignity like any of the rest of us. They are us. Okay? They're just a part of us. They're part of the whole. And they're not going away. Okay? Might as well learn to embrace and be at least somewhat understanding and empathetic. And for whatever we don't understand, understand that we don't have to understand it. Okay? That's what I've come away with, at least. And in 2015, the Supreme Court came out and ruled that couples seeking same-sex marriage had now a legal right to do so. Okay? There have been many, many, many same-sex couples who lived lives together who were not able to enjoy the benefits that my wife and I benefit from a legal standpoint, from a beneficiary standpoint, from other different recognition type standpoint. If I were to die, my wife would get various different um, things that she would inherit from me from a legal standpoint as being her legal spouse. Okay. Um, Gay people never had that. And oftentimes partners would be left high and dry. But since now gay marriage has been legalized since 2015, they now have access to that. Okay. Um, I have a friend who is gay and he has a partner, and he and I would always kind of joke. So you and Todd can get married now. Just because you can, do you want to? You know, so we kind of joke, and it's like, do you want to? Because I'm married, and it's not always easy, man. You know, it's okay. It's like, oh, I should be as miserable as any of the rest of us. You know, a joke that way. Okay. Otherwise, though, recognizing rights for the LGBTQ community, now including transgender, of course, um, is a good step in a way to truly promote the idea of there being fairness and empathy and kindness. Just understanding people come from different walks of lives, but we all have a right to dignity. And that's really a big recognition there. And a lot's going to be discussed in the coming years about transgenderism and many different proponents of the idea of banning transgender athletes in women's athletics. Uh, People born as biological males, identifying now as female, competing against traditionally female athletes and dominating the set. Um, there's a backlash. There's a struggle actually with modern feminists with the transgender movement. So there are all kinds of different discussions within that. So it'll be interesting to see just where things go from a rights of transgender perspective in relation to just an overall women's movement and how there can be some sort of consensus that makes sense. Okay? But if anything else, we have a changing society that is attempting, in the very least, to be more empathetic to people who come from different situations. Maybe they're gay. Maybe they're an immigrant. Maybe they come from a poor background. Maybe they're black and they've been discriminated against their whole lives, and maybe we can do something about that finally. But in the very least, we have a changing society that is at least addressing some of these inequalities and working towards improvement.